the autumn of 1885, in a basement room on Flower and Dean Street in the East End of London, a 9-year-old girl named Eliza Pemberton lay dying of cholera. Her mother had died the day before in the room next door. Her brother Thomas, who had been 7, had died that same morning. The parish men had taken the bodies and left Eliza because they did not know she was still alive. The room was cold. The candle had gone out. The rats had grown bold. And then, just before midnight, a man came down the basement stairs without making a sound, and what he did in the next 2 hours would shape the next 200 years of one charity's quiet work in the East End. Stay with me on this one. His name was Sebastian Cross. He was, at the time he entered that basement room, 712 years old. He had been born in 1173, in the reign of King Henry II, in a stone manor in the county of Kent, the second son of a minor Plantagenet baron. He had ridden to the Crusades at 19. He had not come back the same. The thing that came back, wearing his name and his father's signet ring, was something else. A creature in a marble crypt outside Acre had chosen for him, and had set him down on the road home, and had told him only this, that he would live a long time, and that the long time would be the punishment. For the first 100 years, he had been monstrous. He had killed without counting. He had let the slow river of centuries carry him through the courts of Edward and Richard, and he had thought himself a creature beyond the reach of any moral ledger. Then in 1349, he had walked through a village in Yorkshire where the plague had taken everyone. He had walked into a cottage and found a child of perhaps 6, sitting beside her dead mother, holding the dead mother's hand, singing softly into the dead mother's ear. The child had looked up at him without fear, because fear is a thing one learns from those still living, and there had been no one alive to teach her. She had said in the broad North Country tongue that her mother had wanted to hear the song one last time, and so she would sing it until her mother heard it. Sebastian Cross had not killed that child. He had sat down on the dirt floor. He had listened to her sing. When she could no longer keep her eyes open, he had carried her 3 miles to the next village, where the plague had not yet reached, and he had left her on the doorstep of a priest with a purse of silver inside her shawl. He had not fed for 41 days afterward, because something inside him had gone very quiet. That was when his second life began. He had spent the next 536 years learning how to be useful. Not good. The word did not fit. But useful was a word a man could earn slowly, one small night at a time. He had walked the plague pits of Florence. He had carried orphans out of the burning of Magdeburg. He had walked the smallpox-stricken settlements of New England in 1672, leaving silver and bread on doorsteps. He had been in Yorkshire again in 1685, for nearly a decade, working as the night caretaker at a parish almshouse in the Dales, and he had learned the songs the country mothers sang to their children when fever came in the night. He kept the songs in his head for 200 years. In the autumn of 1885, Sebastian Cross was renting a room above a draper's shop on Commercial Street in Whitechapel, under the name Mr. Sebastian Croft. He had come to the East End for the same reason he came everywhere. He had heard children dying. His hearing was not the hearing of mortal men. He could hear on a still autumn night for the better part of a mile. He could hear the particular wet rattle of a small chest fighting cholera. He had heard from his window above the draper's shop, the basement room at Flower and Dean Street, and he had known there was a child still alive in it long after the parish men had gone. So he had come. The door at the top of the basement stairs had not been locked. The neighbors had stopped coming down. The smell was bad. He had not minded the smell. He had walked down the wooden steps in his fine wool overcoat and his polished black boots, and he had set his silver-topped walking stick against the wall, and he had taken off his gloves, and he had knelt by the small iron bed in the corner where the child lay. She was so light he could not feel her on the mattress. The mattress itself was barely a mattress. It was straw in a sack, and the sack had been damp for days. Her hair had been cut short, the way the parish told mothers to cut their daughters' hair when fever came, and her scalp showed pale through the dark stubble. Her eyes were open. She was looking at the ceiling. She was not seeing the ceiling. He took her hand. He did it carefully, the way a man picks up a moth he does not wish to bruise. Her hand was hot and dry and very small. He held it in both of his. "Eliza," he said, because he had heard the neighbors say her name through the basement window when the parish men had come for her brother. "Eliza Pemberton. My name is Sebastian. I have come to sit with you a while." Her eyes did not move at first. Then very slowly, they slid sideways to find his face. He let her find him. He did not move closer. He did not lean in. He let her do the small work of looking at him, because it was the only work she had left, and he would not take it from her. When her eyes had settled on his, he smiled. A small, careful smile. The kind a grandfather gives a child he has not seen in a long while. "There you are," he said. "There you are, my love." He did not bite her. This is the thing the histories never get right when they tell stories of his kind. They imagine that the long-lived ones go to the dying because the dying are easy, because the blood is unguarded, because the soul is already half out of the body, and so the taking of it is a small theft. They do not understand that some of the long-lived ones go to the dying for the opposite reason. They go because the dying have no one. They go because, in 700 years, a man may learn that the worst thing in the world is not to die. The worst thing in the world is to die alone in a basement room with the candle gone out, and the rats grown bold and no hand at all in your own. Sebastian Cross had decided, somewhere around his 4th century, that he would be the hand. He held Eliza Pemberton's hand, and he began to whisper. He whispered in Latin first, the old prayers, the ones the priests would have said over her if a priest had been able to come. Pater Noster, qui es in caelis, sanctifister nomen tuum. He whispered them slowly. He shaped each word with care. The Latin was the Latin he had learned as a boy in Kent, when the priest at the manor chapel had taught him his letters. It was older than the Latin the modern church used. It had the rough music of the Plantagenet court still in it. He did not know if Eliza understood the words. He did not think it mattered. He thought the shape of them was the thing. The slow rocking sound. The hum at the bottom of the throat. When he had finished the prayers, he began to sing. He sang softly, in the broad North Country tongue. He sang a song that had been sung in a Yorkshire village in 1687 by a woman named Marjorie Pemberton, who had been Eliza's great-great-great-grandmother, though neither Sebastian nor Eliza could have known it. The song was about a brown bird who builds her nest in the hawthorn hedge and sings to her chicks until the snow comes. Sebastian had heard it from Marjorie's own mouth in 1685, when he had carried her grandfather's coffin from the almshouse to the churchyard. He sang the song now. The room was very small. Eliza's eyes closed. He thought for a moment that she had gone, and he did not stop the song, because he had learned long ago that the song must be finished even when the listener has gone, because you do not know exactly when they have gone, and the song is for the part of them that is still leaving, and that part is sometimes still listening when the rest of them is no longer there. But she had not gone. After a moment, her small thumb moved against his palm. A tiny, deliberate motion. She had heard the song. She was telling him she had heard the song. He sang it a second time. He sang it a third time. He sang the second song, the one about the lark on the moor, and then the third, the one about the lass in the river. He sang them in the order Marjorie Pemberton had sung them on that night in 1685, because his memory was perfect, and he had kept them in the order. She had given them to him for 200 years against the chance that he might one day need them. He needed them now. He sat with Eliza Pemberton for 2 hours. The candle, which he had relit when he came in, burned down by half. The rats, which had been bold, did not come near the bed. He did not know why. He had a theory, but it did not matter. What mattered was the small hand in his, growing slowly cooler, and the small breath, growing slowly slower, and the small thumb against his palm, which moved, and then at the very end did not move. He felt the moment she went. It was not dramatic. It was a small letting go, the way a tired child finally allows herself to fall asleep against her father's shoulder. He bent and kissed her forehead. He did it the way a man kisses the forehead of his own dead daughter. He had never had a daughter. In 700 years, he had never been a father. But he knew the shape of the thing. He had watched it often enough. He closed her eyes with the fingers of his right hand. He pulled the thin blanket up over her shoulders. He sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes more, because he did not want her to be alone yet, even now. Then he stood. He took out his pocketbook. He laid 5 sovereigns on the small table by the window, weighted under a stone. The sovereigns were for the parish men, so that she would be buried decently, in a wooden coffin with a marker, and not in the lime pit with the unclaimed. He took up his walking stick. He climbed the basement stairs. He stepped out into the gray, foul, wonderful London dawn, and he stood for a moment on Flower and Dean Street and listened. He heard 3 streets away another small chest fighting cholera. He heard 2 streets the other way a fever cry that no one was answering. He turned toward the closer of the 2, and he began to walk. Listen. If you're still with me on this one, hit that subscribe button, because what Sebastian Cross did over the next 12 weeks in Whitecapel is the part of the story the history books almost recorded, and almost did not, and I want you here for all of it. For the next 12 weeks, Sebastian Cross sat with 73 dying children in the basements and attics and back rooms of the East End of London. He did not transform any of them. He did not bite any of them. He did not take so much as a drop of blood from any one of them. He had not fed in Whitecapel at all, and he would not. He was, in his own words, in his own private journal, which still survives in a locked archive in a house in Hampstead, on a fast. He fed elsewhere. He took the night train to Dover once a week. He fed on cattle in a slaughterhouse outside Calais, paying the slaughterman a generous fee for the privilege of bleeding the beasts before they were butchered for meat. The slaughterman thought him an eccentric English lord with a peculiar medical theory, and was happy enough with the money. Sebastian was scrupulous. He would not feed on a human being in a city where he was sitting with dying children. He felt it was a contradiction the universe could not be expected to forgive. He sat with Mary O'Halloran, who was 8 on Dorset Street. She had Irish blood, so he sang her a lullaby he had heard in a poorhouse in Cork in 1798. She died at 4 in the morning, holding his thumb in her small fist. He sat with Albert Brown, who was 11 on Hanbury Street. Albert was a tough little boy, the son of a costermonger, and he wanted no songs. Sebastian instead told him the story of how the Lionheart had taken the city of Acre in 1191. He did not mention that he had been there. Albert wanted to know if the king had been brave. Sebastian, who had seen the king up close and had not liked him much, said yes, the king had been brave. Albert seemed satisfied. He died at dawn. He sat with Sarah Cohen, who was 6, in a back room behind a tailor's shop on Brick Lane. Sarah's family was Jewish, and Sebastian, who had read the Torah in 3 languages, sang her the Shema very softly, the way her grandfather might have. Sarah, however, did not die. Sebastian had seen at once that she was not as far gone as the others, and he had walked 3 blocks in the small hours to fetch a doctor, and had paid the doctor in gold. Sarah Cohen lived another 70 years. Word began to spread. It spread the way things spread in the slums, by mouth, in queues at the standpipe, in the back pews at Mass, in the long lines outside the parish workhouse. There was a man who came when a child was dying. He came at night. He was pale. He was kindly. He held the child's hand. He sang. He prayed. He left, sometimes, a small purse of money so the burial would be decent. He never gave a full name. He did not stay for the funeral. He could not be found by daylight, because he kept to his rooms by day and walked only by night. But if a child was bad, and a mother went to her doorstep and stood there a while with her shawl pulled over her head and prayed quietly that the man would come, the man would come. The Catholic priests, serving the Irish poor, decided after the first month that what was happening was a small ongoing miracle, and they spoke of it cautiously to the bishop. One of the priests, a Father Donnelly of St. Patrick's, kept a careful ledger in which he wrote down the name of every child the white stranger had attended. The ledger still exists. It records, in Father Donnelly's neat copperplate hand, the names of 73 children between October of 1885 and January of 1886, with the note beside each name, visited by the kind one. The Protestant clergy, less inclined to believe in miracles, decided that the white stranger was a doctor of unusual conscience, perhaps a Quaker. They did not look for him very hard. The cholera was bad. The thing was, in their view, a help. The Jewish community, the most pragmatic of the three, simply called him Der Weißer, the White One. They were grateful. Gratitude in the Jewish East End in 1885 was a thing one expressed by leaving a loaf of fresh bread on a stranger's doorstep, and Sebastian Cross, who could not eat bread, found his doorstep on Commercial Street accumulating loaves all through the autumn. He gave them away to the costermonger's children every morning before he went up to sleep. He stayed 12 weeks. He left in the second week of January 1886, when the cholera had passed its peak, and the new year had brought a hard frost that killed the last of the contagion in the standpipes. He left no forwarding address. He paid his rent through to the end of the quarter. He told the draper only that business called him to the continent. The draper, who had grown fond of his quiet upstairs lodger, was sorry to see him go. He did not, however, leave Whitechapel entirely. Before he left, Sebastian Cross composed a letter to a firm of London solicitors with offices in Lincoln's Inn. The firm had served his various assumed names for nearly a century. The letter instructed them to establish a small charitable fund, to be administered by the Catholic and Anglican parishes of the East End jointly. The fund's purpose was simple. It was to ensure that no child in the East End of London should ever again die in a basement room without a hand in their own. He capitalized the fund with £4,000, the price of a small country estate. The principal was never to be touched. His name was never to appear on any public document. The fund was to be called simply the Cross Memorial. The name on the deeds was to be that of Mr. and Mrs. Walter Pemberton, the parents of Eliza, who had predeceased their daughter, and in whose memory the fund was established by their grateful neighbors. The parents of the 73 children were told in the spring of 1886 by Father Donnelly that a fund had been started in the name of one of the lost mothers, and that they were welcome to subscribe even a penny and consider themselves its founders. Many of them did. The parish put up a small wooden plaque listing all the subscribers' names. The plaque was lost in the Blitz in 1940. The names were copied into the parish ledger before the war and survive there still. Sebastian Cross sailed for the continent on the 20th of January, 1886. He did not return to London for nearly a decade. The fund, however, did its quiet work. By 1890, it was paying for 2 trained nurses to walk the slums at night, attending to the dying, and a small dispensary on Hanbury Street that gave away clean water and laudanum. By 1900, It had a building of its own, a converted brewery on Old Castle Street, with 12 beds for children whose families could not nurse them at home. By 1914, it had 4 buildings. By 1939, it had 6. It was still called simply the Cross House. I am skipping now over a century and 40 years in 3 sentences, because the work of the Cross House is too much work to put in one telling. Hundreds of thousands of children passed through its wards between 1886 and 2025. Tens of thousands died there in clean beds, with a nurse holding their hand. Hundreds of thousands of others were saved by the food and the medicine and the warm bath the Cross House gave them when they were not yet too far gone, and they grew up, and they had children of their own, and somewhere in the long branching genealogies of the East End, there now walk perhaps 1 million people who would not be alive if Sebastian Cross had not knelt by Eliza Pemberton's bed on a foul autumn night in 1885. Sebastian Cross funded the Cross House anonymously for 140 years. He sent the money through a chain of solicitors and brokerage houses, and by the late 20th century, the money was passing through 3 jurisdictions and 4 shell companies before it reached the charity. The auditors had given up trying to trace it. They simply listed it as Anonymous Founder's Bequest in perpetuity. He had given them, by 2025, on the order of £300 million. He visited in person only twice in the first 100 years. Once in 1923, when he walked the wards at night unseen. Once in 1968, during a measles outbreak, when he sat for an hour in the matron's office and gave her an envelope of £5,000 in cash for vaccines, then walked out without giving his name. The third visit was in the spring of 2025. He came on a Tuesday evening in late April. He came in a long charcoal overcoat that he had bought at a tailor's in Savile Row in 1962, and that fit him still, because he had not aged a day. He carried the same silver-topped walking stick he had carried in 1885. He had crossed the Channel by ferry the night before, and had taken a black cab from Liverpool Street to the corner of Old Castle Street, and he had stood for a long minute on the pavement looking up at the building that had been a brewery, and was now, after several extensions, a 4-story modern children's hospice with glass doors and a fresh coat of cream paint and a small bronze plaque beside the entrance reading, in plain English, The Cross House for Children, ESD, 1886. He went in. The receptionist, a young woman with a clipboard, asked if she could help him. He said in his quiet old voice that he had been associated with the charity in the past, that he had heard much of its modern work, that he was visiting London on private business and had wished to see the place once more before he left. He gave the name Sebastian Croft. The receptionist, who had no reason to be suspicious of a polite elderly gentleman in a fine coat, smiled and waved him toward the visitors' lounge, and said the night matron would be glad to give him a tour when she came on shift in 20 minutes. He walked instead along the corridor on the ground floor, where the offices were, and he stopped before a long glass cabinet. The cabinet held the charity's archives. It held photographs. It held the original deed of trust from 1886. It held Father Donnelly's ledger, open to the page for October. It held, framed in oak, a pencil sketch of a face. The sketch had been made in 1899 by a boy named Michael Pemberton, the great-nephew of Eliza, who had grown up on the wards and become a draftsman in middle age. He had drawn the sketch from a description given to him by his great-aunt by marriage, Sarah Cohen, who as a child of 6 had nearly died of cholera in 1885, and who had described the white stranger to Michael perhaps 1,000 times across her long life. The sketch had hung in every successor building since. Sebastian Cross stood before the glass cabinet and looked at the sketch of his own face. He looked at it for a long time. He did not know, until he read the small typewritten card beside the sketch, the names of all the children Sarah Cohen had been able to remember. He read all 73. He had remembered 71 of them himself. He took out a small leather notebook from his inside pocket, and he wrote down the two names he had forgotten, and he put the notebook back. He did not hear the night matron come up behind him. She was a tall woman in her early 30s, dark-haired, wearing the navy blue tunic of the Cross House nursing staff. Her name was Esther Pemberton. She was the great-great-great-niece of Eliza Pemberton, in a roundabout way, descended from a cousin of Sarah Cohen's, who had married back into the Pemberton line in 1922. She had grown up in Walthamstow. She had trained at St. Bartholomew's. She had been at the Cross House for 6 years. She knew the sketch on the wall the way she knew her own face. She looked at the elderly gentleman in the charcoal overcoat. She looked at the sketch. She looked at the gentleman again. She looked at the sketch a third time. She was not a woman given to fancy. She did not believe in coincidences of that kind. But the face in the sketch was the face in front of her, line for line, down to the slight asymmetry at the corner of the left eye, and the small old scar at the edge of the jaw that Sarah Cohen had mentioned to Michael Pemberton in 1899, and that Michael had drawn in with a single careful pencil stroke. Esther Pemberton did not say anything for several seconds. When she spoke very quietly, in a tone so even that no one passing in the corridor would have heard anything strange in it. "Mr. Croft," she said, "I think you've been here before." Sebastian Cross turned. He looked at her. He saw in her face something he had not expected to see. He had expected, if he was ever recognized, to see fear. He saw none. He saw instead a careful, level intelligence, and behind that, the slow dawning of something that was not quite belief, and not quite disbelief, and not quite anything else he had a word for. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago." She looked at the sketch again. She did not point. She did not gesture. She simply held his eye. "How long," she said, "is a long time?" Sebastian considered his answer. He had lived 752 years. He had been recognized in this manner only twice before in his life, and both times he had vanished within the hour, and once he had moved continents, to be sure. He could feel even now the practiced impulse to lie, to laugh, to claim a striking resemblance, to speak of an ancestor. But he was very tired. He was tired in a way that a man only becomes tired after the better part of a millennium. And there was, in this woman's face, a kind of patience he had not been offered by another living being since perhaps the night in 1349 in the Yorkshire cottage, when the small girl had looked up at him without fear, because she had not been taught fear by anyone still living. 140 years, he said. Esther Pemberton nodded slowly. She did not look away. "Would you like some tea, Mr. Croft?" she said. "We can sit in my office. It's quiet there." She took him into her office. It was a small room at the end of the corridor, with a window that looked out onto a small garden where, in summer, the children who could still walk were taken out among the rose bushes. She closed the door. She made tea on a small electric kettle. She set the cup in front of him. He did not touch it. He had not drunk tea in 700 years. But he placed his hands around the cup, because the warmth of the cup was a kind of company, and he had not had company in a long time. She sat across from him. She folded her hands. She waited. He told her. He told her in a low, quiet voice the part of the story he could tell. He did not tell her all of it. He left out, for instance, the long century when he had not been useful at all. He left out the slaughterhouse outside Calais. He left out the marble cryptid acre. He told her instead only what she needed in order to understand, which was that he was very old, and that he had been there in 1885, and that he had been the one to start the fund, and that he had sat with her great-great-great-aunt Eliza for the last 2 hours of Eliza's life, and that he had sung to her a song her grandmother's grandmother had sung in the Dales in 1685, and that he had closed her eyes at dawn, and that the kindness of that night had cost him, in fact, nothing, because there was nothing he had not had to give. He told her that he had walked the wards of the Cross House twice before, in 1923 and in 1968, and that he was here now because he wanted to see, just once more, what the kindness had grown into. Esther Pemberton listened. When he was finished, she did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "I have looked at that sketch every day for 6 years." He nodded. She said, "I always thought when I looked at it that whoever the kind stranger had been, he had passed long ago, and that the only thing left of him was the face on the wall and the work we do here." "I am very glad," he said, "that you do the work." She looked at him. She looked at her own hands. "What do you want me to do, Mr. Cross?" she said. She had used the older name without meaning to. She caught it. She did not correct herself. "Nothing," he said. "I would ask you only this. Do not write it down. Do not put it in the archive. Let the sketch on the wall remain a sketch. Let the donor remain anonymous. Let the parents of the 73 children remain the founders. Let the fund go on as it has gone on. I cannot give you a reason that will entirely satisfy you. I can only tell you that the world has not yet learned in 700 years how to forgive a creature like me, and I am content to let it not learn, and to do my work in the dark, and to keep the door of myself closed." Esther Pemberton looked at him for a long moment. "I will keep your secret, Mr. Cross," she said. "I will not write it down. I will not tell anyone. I would only ask you in return one thing. Yes, walk the wards with me tonight. There is a child upstairs. She is 6. She is from a family on the Roman road. Her mother is not coping. Her grandmother died last year. She has not, all this evening, been able to settle. She does not know us very well. She is afraid." Sebastian Cross sat very still. Then he stood up. He picked up his silver-topped walking stick. He put on his charcoal overcoat. He followed Esther Pemberton out of the office and down the corridor and up a flight of stairs and along a hushed pale hallway with a row of doors. And at the end of the hallway she opened a door, and there was a small bed with a small girl in it, and a window looking out onto the lights of London, and a chair beside the bed. And Esther Pemberton said, very gently, "Lily, this is Mr. Croft. He is an old friend of the house. He has come to sit with you a while." Sebastian Cross sat down in the chair beside the bed. He took the small hand in his. He whispered, very softly in the broad North Country tongue, an old song about a brown bird who builds her nest in the hawthorn hedge and sings to her chicks until the snow comes. The child closed her eyes. Esther Pemberton stood in the doorway for a long minute. She watched the old man at the bedside. She watched the small hand in his. She watched the steady, careful breath of the child who had not been able to settle all evening and who was now, for the first time in many hours, at rest. She closed the door very quietly. She walked back down the long, pale corridor to her office. She sat at her desk. She opened the bottom drawer. She took out a small black notebook that no one else at the Cross House had ever seen, in which she had, over the years, recorded the names of every child she had ever sat with at the very end. She turned to a fresh page. She wrote at the top of the page the date in her own neat hand. She wrote the name Lily Hargreaves. She wrote beneath the name 3 words. She wrote, "He is here." She closed the notebook. She put it back in the drawer. She locked the drawer. She kept her promise. She kept it for the next 40 years, until she was an old woman herself and a new matron had come to the Cross House to take her place. By then, the old man in the charcoal overcoat had visited many times, always quietly, always announced only by a small stir among the night staff, and the unmistakable settling of a frightened child into peace. She knew he would go on visiting long after she herself was gone. On her last evening at the desk, she put the notebook into a small wooden box. She sealed the box with wax. She wrote on the outside in her clear handwriting, "To be kept by the matron of the Cross House. To be opened by no one." The box still sits today in the locked archive of the Cross House on Old Castle Street, in the East End of London. The sketch still hangs in the glass cabinet in the corridor. The fund still pays for the nurses who walk the wards at night. And the old man in the charcoal overcoat still comes when a child is afraid and sits down in the chair beside the bed and takes the small hand in his and whispers very softly an old song about a brown bird who builds her nest in the hawthorn hedge and sings to her chicks until the snow comes. Believe me, he has been doing it for 140 years. He will be doing it long after you and I are gone. And if there is, somewhere in the long ledger of his unspoken centuries, a balance that can ever be settled, it is not for us to settle it. It is for the children in the dark who do not have to die alone. It is for the small hand that, even now, somewhere in the East End of London, is closing on the cool, patient fingers of a stranger who has come at the worst hour, and who has whispered the only 3 words that ever matter at the end. There you are. There you are, my love.